Ogden was basically given a monopoly by the state of New York on a steamboat trade between New York and New Jersey involving the Hudson River.
Ogden's former business partner in this industry, Thomas Gibbons, was given access by the federal government to navigate steamboats in the waters between New York and New Jersey. Ogden, trying to protect his monopoly on this business, brought a lawsuit against Gibbons trying to limit his access in the waters.
Now the real question here was who actually had the right to control the commerce between these two states. Was it the federal government's right? Because they had given Gibbons the power to run his steamboats on the Hudson River between New York and New Jersey. Or did this power lie with the state of New York? Because they had given Ogden the right to use his steamboats along this same passage. Now the question that the juries would have to decide is whether this power lied with the state or whether this power lied with the federal government, and whose decision ultimately took precedence.
First, the case went to New York State Court, where they ruled in favor of Ogden, so Gibbons wasn't allowed to navigate on the Hudson River between New York and New Jersey. Gibbons wasn't a fan of this, so he appealed to the New York Supreme Court, but they too ruled in favor of Ogden.
Gibbons, not satisfied with the decisions that had been made by the New York courts, decided to make this a bigger issue, so he took it to the Supreme Court. And this happened in 1824. And Chief Justice John Marshall and the rest of the Supreme Court, they had to make a decision about whose responsibility regulating this commerce was. Was it the state of New York's responsibility, or was it the federal government's responsibility, and how should this responsibility be manifested?
Whatever the decision would be, it would have a profound effect on the issue of federal power. In contrast with the New York courts, the Supreme Court unanimously gave the decision to Gibbons, stating that the regulation of interstate trade was a responsibility of Congress.
The Supreme Court ruling in Gibbons v. Ogden, that ultimately ruled in Gibbons' favor, came with a definitive interpretation of what's called the Commerce Clause. And that's a clause in the Constitution that says, quote-unquote, "It is the responsibility of Congress to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the several states."
Previously, the phrase "among the several states" was not definitively interpreted, but in Gibbons v. Ogden, the term "among," quote-unquote, may very properly be restricted to that commerce which concerns more states than one.
In Marshall's opinion, commerce had to be governed by Congress, and if it wasn't, all the states would just have their own rules, and it would be chaos and there'd be no fundamental structure to commerce, and this would parallel a system like under the Articles of Confederation. And this led him to say, with regard to commerce, the power to regulate, that is, to prescribe the rule by which commerce is to be governed. This power, like all others vested in Congress, is complete in itself, may be exercised to its utmost extent, and acknowledges no limitations other than are prescribed in the Constitution.
Congress could regulate any trade as long as it was not held exclusively in one state. Gibbons v. Ogden began a boost in the power of the federal government.
The people supported the Supreme Court's decision because it broke up the current monopoly on Hudson River trade. It also allowed for more and more diverse trade to occur. It also lowered the price of trading.
Still, commerce had to be defined. What exactly was Congress regulating? Quote-unquote, commerce, undoubtedly, is traffic, but it is something more. It is intercourse. It describes the commercial intercourse between nations and parts of nations in all its branches, and is regulated by prescribing rules for carrying on that intercourse.
This court decision had some influence on the 1837 decision to do away with state-supported monopoly. The Supreme Court's interpretation of the Commerce Clause of the Constitution was not restricted to steamboats. It also included other forms of transportation, such as rail and air, as well as other things such as telephones, televisions, and segregation.